The year that our Prime Minister has challenged us to enjoy a worldwide family reunion of Barbadians, where each month would see record numbers of Bajans returning to celebrate their roots and the parish they hail from. I am also excited, I am so excited about being part of that homecoming. But there's another reason that I'm excited. I'm excited to hear this conference reporting out the growth that has occurred based on the application of what has been shared during these past few days. Because the conference is not simply about creating a space where folks can just come together and talk about the research that they engage in or hope to engage in, right? Or to test out certain ideas, but it is about coming up with meaningful solutions that could be applied. My vision, which is one that I believe is shared by the organizers of this conference, is one where the best practices employed over the next few years will be the magnet that will draw educators, administrators, students, practitioners, politicians from the region, from the global community, to be a part of our relevant intellectual discourse. As I hinted in my Monday inspiration, while some may see segments of our society as playing near the precipice of disaster, and while we fear that some may unwittingly or deliberately take a giant step forward, in 2020, we will be reporting about how we made it over, how evidence-based practices have been internalized, and how we have embraced the value of operating in an emotionally intelligent manner. For on this rock, we will be beaming the serious Bajan pride as we once again will be seen as a healthy oasis, emotionally, physically, spiritually, psychologically, and yes, fiscally, a phoenix of sorts rising from amongst the proverbial ashes. But before we get to the conference in 2020, there's the day, because the conference is not yet ended, and we have two powerful presentations that we're all looking forward to hearing about. What you share today will undoubtedly help to ensure what I just shared with you, is not a pipe dream, but a vision that is feasible and grounded in reality, and one that will assist in shaping our mission as is needed. I am excited to hear both presenters this morning. I'm particularly excited to hear my colleague that is seated right in front of me, because not only is he also Professor Errol, but he, like Principal Bovel, will be presenting similar interests that I am also focusing on in my sabbatical as I look at capturing the concerns of male students regarding their professional choices and classroom experience. As I move quickly towards closing this inspirational segment, I would like to leave you with some personal, heartfelt sentiments. I share the sentiments that Dr. Rose stated in reference to our national anthem. For those of you who are not familiar with this gem, It begins with the words, "In plenty and in time of need, when this fair land was young. Our brave forefathers sowed the seed from which our pride was sprung." The second verse begins with the words, "The Lord has been our people's guide for past 300 years. With him still on the people's side, we have no doubts or fears." I know that in this conference we did not spend a lot of time, a lot of space speaking about things within the context of faith. But please allow me to implore you that as you are sitting at tables where discussions about paradigm shifts occur, please guard the foundation of faith upon which this land came to be. For in times of plenty and in times of need, God can. As this is the last time I will be sharing with you at this conference, please allow me to extend best wishes to you as you celebrate the birth of our nation and the birth of our Lord. May we continue to rise together as we journey beyond the potholes and the bumps in the road. May God richly bless you.
He did say yesterday he's not Dr. Reverend Bolden, but he's beginning to sound more and more like, like Reverend Bolden. Thank you very much, Dr. Bolden, Professor Bolden, for your 3 days of inspiration. Professor, the Honourable Errol Miller, former Senator and Permanent Secretary in Jamaica, and a lot of other things. We are happy to have you with us this morning. Ms. Bovell, I look forward to hearing from you. I am pleased to have students from sixth form schools who are, I think, focused on the Cape Social Studies because it deals with male disengagement in education and similar topics. They're joining us this morning, and hoping that our staff and faculty are getting here quickly. However, let me introduce our moderator for the morning, and I will move myself out of the way so we can move forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Rowe. A pleasant good morning to everyone. I hope that everybody's feeling blessed to be here. And as Dr. Rowe said, we're expecting that colleagues will be allowed to share in the session. Yes, the traffic was a bit heavy this morning. My name is Tracy Carter-Morris, and I will be the moderator for the 2 concurrent sessions that we're having this morning that deals specifically with male disengagement. I'll introduce the first speaker, and Debbie will present for 30 minutes, and then we'll have Professor Miller coming after Debbie. So I hope that everybody's ready to listen and to be inspired as how we can move the males from what we perceive to be a disadvantaged place into their rightful place in higher education. Debbie Bovell is an enthusiastic educator who is currently assigned as principal acting at the Lutheran Memorial Primary School. She earned both a bachelor's and master's degree in education with honors in 2004 and 2011, respectively. She has worked in several posts, including Early Childhood Coordinator, Information Technology Coordinator, and Education Officer in Barbados. She's currently pursuing a Doctor of Education at Walden University, and has already successfully defended her research study on males under enrollment in higher education after only 2.5 years of study. Debbie Bovell is now a member of the Golden Key International Honor Society. Ladies and gentlemen, students, join me in welcoming Mrs. Debbie Bovell.
Distinguished colleagues in education, ladies and gentlemen, students, a pleasant good morning to you. I am happy to be here at the 6th International Conference on Higher Education and to present my studies, as you can see, entitled Factors Deterring Male Enrollment in Higher Education in Barbados. The local problem is a two-pronged problem. We have decreased male enrollment in higher education institutions over the last decade. I looked at 3 institutions. In Institution A, 46.9% of males were enrolled in 2008. By 2017, the percentage was 32%. In Institution B, in 2016, 24% of males were enrolled. 1 year later, this figure moved to 16%. And in other institutions, the trajectory is the same. The numbers are less, year after year after year. Of course, there's a lack of research in Barbados on the reasons for the decline in male enrollment. I was only able to locate one study at the time. It was done by GIFT 2014, which looked and tried to understand male enrollment patterns in Barbados. It was entitled An Investigation into the Impact of Psychosocial and Cognitive Variables on Tertiary Enrollment in Barbados, with a special focus on men's underparticipation. Now, this was a mixed study, and it focused on secondary school students of both sexes. The focus was on individual factors. Problem context. You're looking at a map of the Caribbean. And according to Johnson, 2017, less than 15% of our students are actually going on to higher education. So within this context, in Barbados, 69% of those students, out of the 15% of students, are actually female students. That is a very telling picture. The broader problem. This problem is not a problem that Barbados is experiencing alone. According to Morrison 2016, the worldwide gross tertiary enrollment rate increased from 10% in 1972, and it rose to 32% in 2012, and is rising by 1% every single year. Notice, while this is occurring, we are seeing a new phenomenon. It's called the reverse gender gap. Hitherto, men were in education, higher education. Now we are seeing women leading in higher education. So the demographic is changing in favor of the females. And this is happening all over the world. It is happening across the Caribbean. It is happening in the United Kingdom, Malaysia, Iran, Australia, the United States of America. And even at Walden University, the numbers are much the same. Women represent 73.2% of students in undergraduate for this year alone. There were 4 research questions. Why are young men deterred from enrolling in a higher education institution in Barbados, even though they have the requisite certification to enroll in higher education? 2, what do young men perceive to be the benefits of not enrolling in higher education? 3, what are the perspectives of young men in Barbados who are qualified to enter college or university on how male participation in higher education might be increased? And 4, what are perspectives of educational leaders in Barbados on how male participation in higher education might be increased? And I use the theoretical framework by Cross, 1981, along with 2 others, Knowles' theory of andragogy and Bordeaux's social capital theory. And what this pretty much says, her theory assumes that the persons who have not participated in education are the ones who are best able to tell the story. In Cross's chain of response theory, she mentions the fact that there are 6 elements that determine whether students participate or not. Their self-evaluation, their attitudes about or to education, their concept of the importance of goals and their expectation to meet those goals, the life transitions that they're currently going through, the information that they're receiving, and if they perceive that there are opportunities or barriers. Now, the point E, notice I say that GIFT 2004 only focused on individual factors. Cross, 1981, in her model, posited that there are not only individual factors that impact, but institutional and situational factors as well. So I used a case study methodology, and I used the case study methodology on purpose. 1, Barbados is actually the size of a small school district in the US. So it was small enough to be a case. A case can be a community, it can be an organization, it can even be a nation. And I also use the case study method because this method allows for the study of a phenomenon from more than one perspective. I want to hear from the men, but I also want to hear from some other important persons. And Shenton says, a case study research allows for multiple voices exhibiting characteristics of similarity, dissimilarity, redundancy, and variety to gain greater knowledge of a wider group rather than simply the individual informants who are contributing the data. So five educational leaders and 7 males made for the bonded case. The sampling method used was maximum variation sampling. And I chose men deliberately who graduated in 2014 from high school, who attained 4 or more O-levels, and who attended either a grammar or newer secondary school. Notice there are some of the criteria in red, and those were chosen to make sure that there was variation in the participants. The sampling method for the educational leaders, key informants, key knowledgeables, and key reputational sampling. I felt that persons who were leaders in institutions across Barbados, that they had the knowledge to be able to speak to this topic, having risen to the top of their field and having interacted with males through the years. And these persons came from higher education institutions, secondary schools, and the Ministry of Education. Data was collected using interviews and a focus group. The young men were interviewed singly, and the focus group, of course, the 5 educational leaders. Data analysis included pre-coding, first cycle coding, in vivo coding, values and structural, second cycle coding, pattern versus coding, and theming the data. Now we're at the part you really came to hear. Results. Now, the men in this study range from the age of 19 to 21 years. All of them were single. 5 came from one school, 1 came from one other secondary school, and the other another secondary school. Of course, you can appreciate that it is difficult to find young men who are willing to talk to you about why they have not gone on to higher education. So it was a difficult task. All of these young men came from newer secondary schools. Of course, it was difficult, and I tried to find a young man who was at a grammar school or high performance school in Barbados. I could find none who had not gone on. Because the truth of the fact is they're expected to go on, and most of them do go on. Now, interestingly enough, 6 of those young men were employed in an age when it is hard to find employment. And 1 was recently employed. None of them had dependents. All were black, and of course they came from different types of families. The educational leaders were comprised of 4 males and 1 female. And as you can see, they reflected persons who were leaders in different types of institutions. Why are young men deterred from enrolling in higher education in Barbados? Based on the collected data from the focus group and from the men, these are the results. These are the major factors. Dispositional. From the case study, it was very clear that there was a lack of interest in books. We discussed that just now, Professor Bolden. And there was a greater interest in making money. And I want to read an excerpt from the focus group, from the female, who I shall call Kate. And this is what she said. That is partly to explain for the dispositional factor. She said, "There's also a very real situation that we have where females expect men to look after them. And there's pressure on young men that if you want to have a girlfriend, you have to be able to bring the money." She said, "I had a conversation with a young man very recently, and he said he didn't have a girlfriend. He said, 'I'm at KFL. I have no money to support no woman. So no woman don't want me because all I have to give her is books.' So Kate said, 'Though things have gotten better, that is still there. What do you have to give me? What do I have you for? And some young men find themselves in that position. One man said this: if you don't have currency, you don't have currency. The institutional factors, the length of the program, that was a problem. Most of them thought that the courses were irrelevant, although there are new courses being added every year to the lineup of courses being offered in higher education in Barbados. The course times were a problem. The use of traditional teaching methods and the lack of a practical component, and this was a biggie, the lack of a practical component. Situational, the cost. Coincidentally enough, the government of Barbados introduced a tuition fee in 2014. So this is a legitimate deterrent for, this was a legitimate deterrent for the males, and of course, the poor performance of the economy in Barbados. Men are deterred from enrolling in higher education when they conduct a cost-benefit analysis of the rewards of studying in the present economic environment in Barbados when compared with the investments of time and money that they're expected to make. One participant adequately captures the essence of this point. This is what John said. He said, I have mixed emotions about it from what I've seen in my life and my family's life and people around me. It is one thing to go to university and do a degree and to study very hard and spend money to do it. But to me in Barbados right now, you're not guaranteed a job in that field you study. I have many people around me who did their masters and bachelors, etc., and they have pretty average jobs that they have no right working. To give you a short example, he said, I have a friend of mine who went to UE, and he spent a lot of money, and he did his master's, but he currently repairs shoes for a living. To me, if you are not planning to leave the bird's nest of Barbados, it does not make any sense going to university unless you really have a passion for that area and you know this is something you want to do for the rest of your life. Indeed, John captured the thinking of a lot of males. Obviously, I cannot generalize, but a lot of males. What is the sense of going on to higher education? This is not going to work for me. What do young men perceive to be the benefits of not enrolling in higher education? You should have expected to see that there. Money. The ability to earn money from a job. Gaining work experience because they understand and recognize it's important to get a foot through the door. They have seen a lot of persons get highly qualified and then they cannot get the job that they want. Time, of course, freedom to do whatever they want to do. And opportunities to travel. Obviously, I was able to get from this last one the sense, obviously, for this person and persons, there is money there for them to go somewhere and enjoy themselves. Yes, of course. What are the perspectives of young men in Barbados on how male participation in higher education might be increased? They said, provide a forum for males to share what studies really interest them. They do not feel as if their voices are heard. And I can understand a little bit about why that might be the case, because I have an adult son, and he spent a few months at a certain institution, and I actually told him, you need to drop out. You're going to waste my money. I said, find something to do. And he did. But what he found to do could not be done in Barbados. That thing was sound engineering. And I did all I could, and I made sure, of course, with my husband's help and with God's help, I said, find what you want to do, and I'm going to send you to do it. And that was sound engineering. Yeah. The males didn't feel that there was enough encouragement for them to pursue higher education, especially in the school. Their parents encouraged them, but in the school setting, especially in the newer secondary schools, there was not the expectation for them to go any further. They felt it's important to utilize one-on-one coaching, mentoring, or buddy system to support males in enrolling in higher education. They felt it was important to organize more career showcases. And they definitely wanted to have higher education programs that included a practical component. I know this from personal experience again, because with my son, he was doing a practical course at one point at the associate degree level, and it was 2 years of all theory, and he became disengaged. And interestingly enough, this one bowled me over. They wanted to be guaranteed a job after completing their studies. I mean, that is not real world thinking, is it? So let's hear from the They wanted, of course, more courses that had greater relevance to the emerging economies. I'm sorry, they should have said educational leaders. My apologies. So the educational leaders said, develop more courses that would interest males that have greater relevance to the changing global economy. They also said, create policies that are conducive to the enrollment of both genders in higher education. The educational leaders said, create linkages between higher education and the job market so that men can earn money while they are studying. The education leader said, create more industry-ready programs where males have greater opportunities for employment after their studies. They also said, marry academic and technical subjects. The education leaders had a lot to say. They said, we need to share information on the job market to assist males in understanding local and global demands. And last but not least, they thought it might be good if young men could be exposed to a short stint in the Barbados Youth Service. That organization has been known for helping young persons to be a lot more disciplined. I thank you for allowing me the opportunity to present this morning. And I take the opportunity to thank God, of course, my family, my work colleagues, and my friends, Dr. Signe Parent, my chair, Dr. Carol Pierce, second member, Dr. Leslie Van Gelder, the University Research Reviewer, Sarah Whitty from the Walden Library, and the Chief Academic Officer. Thank you for being such a wonderful audience.
Thank you, Mrs. Baval, for your presentation. I'm sure that colleagues and students here will agree with me in saying that it was very, very informative. Your research gives us a lot to think about, and we look forward to hearing the recommendations that are coming out of the research, as well as further research in the area so that we can address the issue at hand. Money is always good, but it's very interesting how it played such a significant role, and it was such a significant factor in Debbie's research. So I want to thank you very much, Mrs. Bavel, for your presentation. Let's give her a round of applause again. Professor Errol Miller, educator extraordinaire, who is the first among local educators in Jamaica to carry out significant research on issues of race, gender, and other social issues as they affect education. He developed the theory of place, out of which the research on male marginalization and other issues have been examined. Professor Miller has had significant impact on education through research and publication, and his seminal work has influenced educational policies. As permanent secretary in the Ministry of Education in Jamaica, he has provided the leadership for the implementation of major reforms, such as the implementation of free secondary and tertiary education, the integration of schools serving children with various disabilities into the public system, and the addition of grade 10 and 11 to 66 three-year secondary schools. As a member of the Electoral Advisory Committee, Professor Miller has made sterling contributions to Jamaica's electoral reform process and has been instrumental in the development of the improved registration and voting system. For his work, Professor Errol Miller has earned numerous awards locally and internationally. Ladies and gentlemen and students, join me in welcoming Professor Errol Miller.
Madam Chairman, distinguished colleagues all, if I come without PowerPoint, it's not because I do not know about it and use it. And if I come without paper, it's not because I'm not prepared. It is because I'm coming at the back end of what is obviously has been a very rich conference on higher education, in which a lot of research information has been shared, and in which there's a lot of contemplation of different things. I'm also coming in the, if I use the baseball term, in the position of a closure. And therefore, in closing, must try to bring things together, most of which I have not heard. I consider it a great honor to be invited to this conference in this capacity this morning, because Barbados has a special place for me. I have always admired Barbadians. Going back, I remember reading something in the 1870s, where the Lieutenant Governor of St. Lucia was reporting to the Colonial Office with respect to how labor in St. Lucia behaved. And he said the Barbadian, this is 1870, is most conscious of his rights and most apt in insisting on it, and is one that you cannot push around. So whatever characteristics Barbados have, it is there for a long time. Barbados was the only colony that did not become a crown colony that has had an assembly that has operated continuously through elections. Also one of the first colonies to be established. In addition to that, my wife works with a bank and they keep on transferring her to places without my permission. And I have had to go there. And I keep the home in Jamaica because banking is a very fickle profession. One morning somebody might reorganize, re-engineer, do all kinds of things and you're out of a job. And I've always said to her, if that happens, you know that there's a furnished home to which you can return immediately. So I keep the home in Jamaica. She goes wherever the bank places her, and I go in between. And one of the places that they have placed her is here, in Barbados. So I've had an experience of Barbados, not only as a visitor, but as a partial resident. My daughter went to St. Gabriel's for 1 year and then to Queen's College. I know the pressures of the common entrance. I also know Barbadian roads, that you can be stuck in traffic jams. I know you have an education system that works, a bus system that works, a health system that works, well-organized country. And so you can appreciate that I would be happy to come to Barbados. I was here last year on vacation with my wife, paid my own money to come. And we just came for a long weekend to meet up with friends and to visit places that we like and to worship with people that we have worshiped with. I think I've established enough. I also want to say this, that, and I don't know a great deal about it, but Barbados is at a time of economic and other crises. And therefore, it represents an opportunity. And I tell you, my life has been similarly. I am a teacher by choice with a single-minded purpose from I was 19 years old, that my calling in life was to be a teacher. But I've lived an unplanned life. And everything you have heard, if I've been this or that, I've been principal of a college, permanent secretary of the Ministry of Education, president of the Teachers Union, member of the Senate, chairman of the Electoral Commission, has never been me seeking. It has been some real problem. And somehow, because I got my PhD by the time I was 30, and the time I was coming up, people thought, Errol can do this. Even when I doubted myself, didn't know it, but by the grace of God. And I was thrown in at the deep end where you had to perform. And you had, because the goals were high stake. And I've taken the risks, because if you're going to serve in life, crises are the opportunities to make a difference. So they have never been things of personal ambition. It's the answer to the call to serve. And then you say, but you've been a professor in education and been in the university. I went on the staff of UWI when I was 26 years old. But I'm not really an academic. I've got my PhD because, having got my master's, I did a job for the Ministry of Education out of sheer patriotism and for free. Because as a science teacher, I was chairman of the science curriculum, about 27 or 28 years old. And I did it, and I submitted it, and they submitted it to the World Bank, and nothing happened. Then about 4 or 5 months later, they called me to do something about it, and I said, what happened? How come? And then after I sent it in, they'd use it to meet a deadline for the World Bank, then employed an overseas consultant, paid him a great price, took that to be the real list, submitted it to the World Bank, which rejected it to say, this list is far inferior to the one supposed, and you must go back to the one that was submitted further. And after I learned of it, I said, nobody is going to call me Mr. Miller and disregard. And it so happened that it coincided with the final evaluation for my master's, for which they gave me a distinction, and for which the external examiner in England, who was the head of the Institute of Education, London, said if this thesis were presented here in London, we would upgrade it to a PhD. And the University of the West Indies said, you're the first student to be awarded a higher degree. We think we must award a master's first. And so they gave me a distinction instead. And I simply took a new topic, but I negotiated that they backdate my registration for 6 months. That's how I have a PhD. I hope you understand that. And I'm not really an intellectual. I don't just engage in speculation, in thought. Because I want to serve in the best way possible. And when I'm serving and acting, I believe. And having done the job, I retreat and say, now, Errol, what in the name of patience have you done? And I doubt it and reflect on it. So let me just explain which direction I'm going to take and why. As I told you, I got a distinction for my master's. But all my hypotheses were proven in the reverse. I'd used all the high-powered statistical techniques that had come from natural sciences with, but found that the theories in education were far weaker than the statistical tools. That every one of the hypotheses could be explained by hindsight, but none by foresight. Decided that for my PhD, I would not put hypotheses, I'd ask questions instead. Then later on, when I was finished, it was my good fortune because the dean of the graduate school for Harvard was stuck in Jamaica. And I was a young lecturer whose time could be wasted. And he came to my office because they sent him there. And he asked for a thesis to read. Mine was the only one that was finished, my master's thesis. I gave it to him. And he came back to the next day and said, is this the standard of UWI? And I said, I don't know. This is. And he says, would you like to come to Harvard? And I thought he was really fooling me around. And the next thing, I get a postdoctoral fellowship to Harvard and a Ford Foundation fellowship. That was the richest scholarship I've ever got in my life. Could take my family and everybody there and enjoy things while studying. But at that time, I did a postdoctoral fellowship in science education because I was a little bit confused with the social sciences to which I had gone. And I happened to do 2 courses that have had a lifelong effect on me. One was a reading course in philosophy of science, having also done scientific method and history of science, in which professor would give me, Israel Scheffler just died recently, would give me 1 or 2 books to read. I'd read them and come back and have an hour and a half discussion with them each week. And I learned from that data is a difficult thing to deal with because to interpret it, there must always be personal knowledge, personal insight and understanding. And the other course I did was with a guy named Bob Light, who would come in to a class with about 7 or 8 of us, with a stack of data, put it before us, and say, how do you know this is not garbage? And for the whole of that course, that's what we did. Try to determine if this is garbage or sense. So, having found that the theories in education and social sciences couldn't deal with so-called third world countries, couldn't deal with matters of gender, couldn't deal with matters of race, except you're trying to prove a certain set of people inferior. I discarded them. And then I came to the conclusion that this was because they were largely done by white men of the West. But why condemn them? They had done the hard work of trying to understand the world from their perspective. Our task is to try to understand the world from our perspective and to do the hard work that is involved in that. And therefore, I developed my own theory, the theory of place. And here's the point. It is in the development of that theory and understanding it and applying it to situations of crises to which I was thrown in, and to find that it worked. Now, I'm sitting before a number of girls and boys, but mainly girls, doing sociology in Cape. And I understand I'm on the curriculum in some areas there. In fact, it's my granddaughter who brought that to my attention. And I did my master's on physical beauty, color, and body image. And then when I did the PhD, I did it on girls, because I found it is easier to study one gender than both, because there were some differences. And this is before it was popular. Then I discovered that women that are successful, especially in education, pay a high price for that success. And I was as feminist as a man could be. In fact, the building in Jamaica that is named after me is the hall of residence for women. And I did a lot in terms of exposing in that direction. So you can't really put a charge of male chauvinism against me and succeed. But in the course of being the principal of the Michael College, which is the oldest teacher education and the largest teacher education institution in the region, I discovered that there was a group of men who had as many problems as women. And therefore, you could not define gender only in terms of female marginalization. And I studied that for 7 years before I said a word. But I was asked to give the memorial lecture for my mentor, Professor Aubrey Phillips. And I wondered, how could I honor this man who had done so much for me in my own intellectual formation in the social sciences? And I could hear his voice, "Errol, you are a coward. You are not presenting what you have found." And so I gave a lecture in his honor called "Marginalization of the Black Male." Caused a furor. It was done on the 30th of April, 1986. Some said, Errol, I think you're onto something. Others said, I was a male chauvinism, practicing scientism, and engaged in obscurantism. And it was somebody from Barbados. Happened to be a Guyanese who was at Cave Hill. Hard to deliver that charge against me in Jamaica because I'm one of the favorite public speakers there. So what I'm going to do today, and I don't want to think, Mr. Pavel, think I'm refuting anything, because I did a study in Antigua last year in which I found very much the same things. But my way of interpreting them is quite different. And this is why. If you define gender as involving traditionally both male and female, you have to understand that gender is not the only axis of domination, subordination in society. So when patriarchy is defined as gender, male domination and subordination of women, it is the most limited understanding of patriarchy that you come up with, because it treats both male and female as two undifferentiated, monolithic groups that have sustained their coherence over time and history. And there have always been powerful women and marginal men in societies of all ages. It's just that they present themselves in different ways. Weber, the famous German sociologist, defines patriarchy as the rule of fathers in families. Essentially, this means the rule or the domination or the final authority resting with the eldest male of the family. And therefore, he exercises that over younger males and females. But age is mutable. So younger males become older males and are treated as such because they are successors to the older males. And therefore, because, all right, let me not go there right now. But female marginalization in the family is more permanent. But older is preferred to younger, as male is preferred to female, because it is determining rank inside the family. However, sons, the younger males, are related to the females either as sons or brothers. And therefore, that mitigates the relationship within the family. So Weber's definition is confined to the private sphere of the family. But you have to go through a lot of gymnastics intellectually to apply it within the public sphere. So my definition, it may sound arrogant, but my definition of patriarchy is generation, gender, and generation. You say, why you say generation? It's because genealogy is a wider term because it encompasses all of those who claim blood relationships with castes, tribes, clans, and even race. And therefore it means the elder males of the kinship collective. Now, the kinship collective is important because it defines the external boundary of who is involved. And by defining the external boundaries, it also says who is not kin. And where you share kinship, there's a way of resolving conflict that is determining common ancestry and determining who is the elder brother. And if you come under the covenant of kinship, then you are treated differently because you belong than if you are outside and another kinship collective. And remember, patriarchy does not only involve domination, subordination. It also involves identity, solidarity, and mutual obligations. So, for example, in the family, the obligation of sons and daughters, and all females, is to honor, accept, and abide by the decisions of the patriarch, of the elder, of the father. But he in turn must protect and provide for them. So the mutual obligation, the reciprocal obligation, changes the relationships. So when you apply that also with the definition of genealogy, it says all who comes within that. There's mutual obligation, there's common identity, there are common bonds of solidarity. Now, when you step outside that and you cannot be covered by the covenant of kinship, you are alien. And if you look throughout history, when kinship collectives collide and conflict and compete, they treat the other kinship with great cruelty and brutality. So you cannot understand genocide, slavery, castration without understanding that and seeing it right throughout history. And the males are always treated more severely than the females and children, because the children, the women and the children, can be incorporated into the genealogy of the conquerors, but the males cannot. Killing them is one thing. Castrating them allows their life, but cut off their line. And they usually are the administrators, because they totally depend upon the one who has saved their lives. And if you go through history, you'll find that eunuchs were the administrators. Let me come forward from ancient society to modern society, because you can no longer, within the last 500 years, as nation states have arisen and developed constitutions and laws, you cannot now engage in genocide or castration or slavery. So what happens with the other groups with which you compete and collide and conflict if you cannot engage in the ancient practices? What you do is deny them the material means by which they can sustain their masculinity. And that is why, when you look at all of the avenues of upward social mobility, not only in education, but within the labor force, you will find that that happens. And one of the things that we must avoid is blaming the victim for the crime. So one of the things I have found is that families or mothers and single mothers and their parents, however you define it, wife and husband, who are not in the upper echelons, they all do their private rate of return analyses. So do teachers. So they invest in the children most likely to succeed. And wherever you find either male or female in dominance or with greater upward mobility opportunity, it has nothing to do with males or females because intellectually they are equal. It has to do with bias in society. It has to do with the structure of opportunity. Now, let me come forward. Remember this. If the three things are three axes of subordination, domination, of identity, shared bonds of solidarity, and mutual obligations, when you pull any thread, single thread, other things are going to move. Biologists largely engage not only in deductive nomological explanations and inductive probability, but also in pattern explanations. So, applying the biology background to the sociology and the economics, you have to make the transition to what has happened to genealogy in modern times. Genealogy is being largely replaced by voluntary forms of association. So you have political parties, you have unions, you have clubs, you have religious groups, probably the first to put society not on a group, a lineage basis, but on an individual basis. So these are, and then you have nationality. And when you have nations and nationality, nationals enjoy certain rights conferred by the Constitution and gives due process of law to all on an equal basis. Nationality defines who is the alien with no rights as against the nationals. And in nation states, genealogy, gender, and generation ought to be nothing less or nothing more than legacy constructs of ancient society. They should have no legitimate constitutional or legal categorizations. I think you would agree with me on that. What difference would it make if you're a national, if you are born to a particular ethnic group? What difference should it have if you are male or female? What difference should it have if you are young or old? All citizens, nationals, are conferred with equal rights. Because the difference between ancient and modern society is that the latter had rights in people. Modern societies, based on the nation side, have the rights of individuals. You cannot dispose of them as you may like. Because then the public sphere comes into it and invades the private sphere and says, no, this is not possible. That's why in some places children can call the police on their parents with impunity. In other words, where these continue to prevail, it's because there has not been the transition from ancient society based on ethnicity and genealogy to modern society based solely on the rights of individuals irrespective of gender, generation, and genealogy. Now, having put it out in that sort of theoretical framework, let me bring it home. If you think I'm just talking abstractly, faced with this problem, in each of these, genealogy is splintered into a lot of groups, ethnic groups, and in the Caribbean, even into pigmentocracies of who has lighter skin color than who. But if you look at it also, genealogy is no longer young or old because people are living longer. There is the Generation X, the baby boomers, Generation Y, the millennials, Generation Z before me. Because age cohorts are becoming more discrete as people are living longer and more coherent to develop views that represents their age cohort. And gender is no longer two. Gender is also, in some places, a matter of choice. My daughter came home in her junior year. She's 22 years old. She came home in her junior year from college. She went to the United States because she couldn't do what she wanted here. And she says, "Daddy, I don't know if it existed among juniors, but no, I've gone back to college this year. Officially, you are asked what pronoun do you want to be addressed by? He, she, or they?" So when you look at modern society where ethnicity still exists, voluntary association still exists, you now have an atomization, a fragmentation. When you begin, let me use a simple example. Pardon me, I'm going to use the United States because we are all considering it. And I want to show you how the Donald relates to this. Because if I don't do this, you might think I am just talking up here. When you have older white males, listen to this, generation older, ethnicity white, males gender. You can also have all the other things. Am I not? And they are in some order. You can have young black males, you can have middle-aged Hispanic females, you can have, you can go down. How is society trying to deal with this atomization and fragmentation? It uses demographics to describe it. Now, when you look at demographics are statistical counts. That's what demographic is. It's a study of populations in terms of rates of numbers and rates of births, of deaths, of disease, of migration. Am I not right? But demographics of itself does not come up with conceptual categories within which to interpret those numbers. So what we're witnessing is the atomization of patriarchy and the political dimension that has come in to replace ethnicity doesn't have the same coherence because blood is a little thicker than values, or assumed because it may be factional and it may be fictive and fictional. Race is a fictional concept. Human blood doesn't divide us in the ways that people talk about. Our DNA, as a biologist, what is a group, a species? It is reproductively isolated in the field. But I tell you this, in the Caribbean we should know this. We may be divided at work in the day, but we are integrated in some bed at night. And people like me are a product of that. So, understand what is happening. And in this, where patriarchy that has been this big overarching way of organizing human society is in crisis. So what is happening? Some people are reaching back. And in the United States and all over, let me stick with the United States, not come to the Caribbean. A generation came up to speak about diversity and the rights of individuals and a non-ethnic society. Barack Obama is the first non-ethnic president of the United States. What do I mean by that? He was an African American who was president of the United States. He was not an African American president of the United States. He didn't promote his gender as president. He upheld the values and the norms and the conventions and the imperial objectives of the United States. I think you could agree with me on that. And he did it in a dignified manner that has attracted the attention even of his greatest detractors, who is Donald Trump. He's a throwback to WASP, white, Anglo-Saxon, Protestant, of the brat type that believes that it belongs. He can sow his wild oats and have all of the people outside, and we in the Caribbean can understand that, and then have a wife and a family that he takes care of. And in Caribbean politics, having external affairs, what my father used to call wayward fancies, has never been a problem. In fact, it has been testimony of male vitality even in advanced years. So understand this, Trump is not a cause. He is a symptom of a group that has remained stuck on the old ethnicities. Are you following me? They call it his base. And he's an opportunistic numbers man who has been able to do the calculations on the demographic, realizing that no ethnic group is monolithic. All will have different allegiances to different numbers, and whites are still 67% of the United States, and if I do the numbers, I could still win. Now, let me put it to you this way. We in the Caribbean are past the stage when we can reach back. We were the first, if you look at the British Empire and the nation states that have come out of the British Empire, we was the first to abandon white, Anglo-Saxon, Protestant. You see, understand what WASP is. Anglo-Saxon, who were the Anglo-Saxons? The English. As different from the Anglo-Celtic, the Scots, the Irish, and the Welsh. Because the English had the powers that accrued by reason of war and royal heritage. And as they contested with other groups in Australia, New Zealand, the Caribbean, those other groups, and they claim to be the powers that be, white, they're Anglo-Saxons. But they became white because soon they discovered they have to have common cause with the French and the Spanish and the Dutch. And Anglo-Saxon remains only in terms of English language. And by the end of the 19th century, they had to abandon Protestant as well, because the Catholic Church that has remained outside by the 1900s became inside, as they agreed with the imperial mission to anglicize the population and not. And look at St. Lucia, and you will find this happening. I don't have time to go into all of that history. But what I'm saying to you is that we cannot reach back to that past, to an ethnic past. We know too much about the common humanity of all humankind. We still have elements of it in us, and because I'm in Barbados, I'm not going to go into the ethnic remains of things. I leave you to do that. But notice the situation of men and women. The position of men is becoming increasingly polarized. I think you would agree with me on that. When you look at the top in terms of wealth and power, money, it still has a different ethnic complexion from the bottom. So what is happening to a lot of young people, especially young men, is they are leaving the same geographical location from which they came, taking a different educational route, and end up at the same occupational position as their parents, because they are inheriting their social position. Who is likely not to inherit? It's the women. But where they are stuck in the middle, except they are now breaking through, and Barbados know this. Let me just say this to you in two ways so that you can understand that I'm not just talking up here. And I'm going to give you two different examples, because we have to look beyond the surface of things. One of the major banks in the Caribbean came to me early in the 1990s and was very concerned that of the top 50 positions, only 5 were female. And I had done this study and stuff, and they said, could you tell us where we are looked, we can't see where we're wrong. And I studied it, I had focus groups, discussions, and so on, because I believe we have to be engaged in grand design theories, which sees ourselves in the world, but we also have to look into case studies where we're looking at the contextual factors, because diagnosis can be universal, but therapy is contextual. I studied it for months. And then one day it hit me. I went to the top of the organization, the 2 top people, and I said to them, what does mobility mean? And they say, well, mobility means the ability of our employees to move from as we place them in different places. And I say to them, is it an empirical fact or an exclusionary factor? They said, what do you mean by that? I said, well, if it is an empirical fact, you offered it to both male and females, and they said yes or no. So mobility then is an empirical fact. If it is an exclusionary factor, you don't offer it to the females because you say they can't move because they have families. And let me tell you, single females have always been in a different position than married females. I just was, look, I'm not here promoting my books, but if you look at things that I've written, the prophet and the virgin, the masculine and feminine roots of teaching, you will find me tracing it through ancient Sumerian civilization, through classic Judaism, through the classic era of Islam, through the American nation state and in the Caribbean. It took me 20 years to write because I was trying to understand what it means to be a teacher educator. I wrote it for myself. It's dense, highly documented. And the single female who maintains the connection to the lineage has always been a bit different from the married female that compromises it with commitments elsewhere. Let me come back. Let me take the second example of me applying what I've learned. Jamaica is in a crisis. As I tell you, everything I've ever gone to has been a crisis, but this one was the biggest. In 1979, going up to the 1980 elections, 600 people died, classified as a result of political violence. In other words, people of one party killing people of another political party. My country has its problems, but it also has a certain genius. And one of the things that happened is that the two major political leaders of that time, Michael Manley and Edward Seaga, decided, along with some people they were mentoring or being mentored in the party to take over, Bruce Gold and P.J. Patterson, they decided, no, this is not good for the country. We have to pull back. We have to pull back from what we inherited from the British, which was a winner-take-all situation. That the winner controls the electoral system in terms of of the resources given to it, the determination of constituencies, we have to, and they created an electoral body. They first gave it the worst name you could put it, an advisory committee. But they made it up this way. 2 people named by the Prime Minister, 2 people named by the leader of the opposition, and 3 agreed on by both, one of whom is the chairman. And when we say agreed on by both, means they both accept it. In order, you're certified independent. It means you can be the victim of both sides. And those 7 people brought a new structure and a new arrangement to the electoral system. But they were indeed largely involved in the planning and putting in the foundations. And in 2000, there was a real crisis. For 6 months, they couldn't decide on who were the independents. And people began to predict that the next general election is going to be the bloodiest. And so they went looking for 3. Bloody-minded people. And I was one of them. And I was the one they would agree on to be chairman. Understand this. That is a frightening situation to be nominated to. Our task was to produce an electoral system in which the people would accept the results even if it were close. And we had never had a close election. By the grace of God, we did it. And we were accredited. And I served for 12 years there, interacting with prime ministers, leaders of civil society, in working through this. Many times when I would be saying what to do, there would be disagreement. And how I had to get control of the situation is, if I didn't think it would be fatal, to accept the conclusion of my colleagues. We do it, and then it runs into problems. And I take the blame with everybody. But when we meet privately, the next time, you're going to do it my way. Because I couldn't explain what I was doing, because it would cause controversy. But it was within this theory I'm talking about, and this understanding of people, how to get the most violent youngsters to put down the guns and obey the rules and stay out of the politics. And to me, the greatest story that came out of that was told to me by the principal of a college, because we employed young people, a lot of young people who didn't know better, but had the character and the competence and the courage to go into the most violent areas and be the presiding officers. And of course, to be practical, we had to arrange military organizations to keep them safe. And this is the story that took place in one. 4 youths with guns walked into polling station and demanded to vote. The young lady said, the 2 policemen there, but they were useless in that area. And she reported to her principal that she decided to rely on her training. What was her training? Treat everybody with respect. Demand that everybody follow the rules. And she said to them, sirs, to vote in this polling station, your name must be on the voters list in this polling station. What are your names? And they gave her the names. And she looked through the list and said, sirs, your names are not on the voters list in this polling station. But there's a supervisor outside that has the list for all the polling stations in your location. I suggest that you check with them. 4 youths, males with guns, look on one female with courage and moral authority, and walked out and went out there. Let me say this to you. There's no solution in guns. I'm going back to the United States. There is no solution in going back. The solution relies in moral courage to take the path that will lead us forward. In other words, what I'm saying to you is, with patriarchy in demise, with people reaching back to an ethnic past that will not come back, what do we do here with the opportunity that presents itself with a crisis? It is to look at what kind of society, and more than society, civilization we're building. And to you young people, I'm saying this. It may sound abstract, but it's these kinds of abstract foolishness that brings about real change, where you have the courage to do it. In other words, so far we have been thinking about the Caribbean only as a convenience. As long as we are getting at it is Jamaica. Let me not touch Barbados. It is Jamaica or Bahamas or wherever, and the Caribbean. And it is only the Caribbean if it has an advantage, because the minute it doesn't have an advantage, we retreat to nationalism. But nationalism is problematic in these days. Today, we have a situation in which capital and communication and everything can flow across national borders, but people are locked up. How do you think you can extract economic advantage and keep people locked up? And that is why the refugees problem is such a thing. When people begin to invade those who believe that the societies, they are the patent holders, the originators, the owners of their society, and you are now invading it. I hope you see the problem that now confronts us, not just in the Caribbean, across the world. And so regionalization, which was the solution, is now fracturing in Brexit. The Anglo-Saxons are now nationalists. Not to speak of whites in the United States. If we can conceive of ourselves in this way in the world, that we have a destiny that must be different from our past. We understand all of the injustices of the past. But what we are asked to do right now is to construct a more just society, a more caring society. In that regard, Barbados, you're coming late. I must tell you this in my own study. You're coming late to the issue. We faced that crisis about 15 years ago. I must tell you that. And as I've studied it, I've seen it. You're coming late because there is some accommodation between the different groups not to settle issues with finality and fatality. That has been the genius of the Barbadian society. But now you have to go a little further. It has to be real change. And real change is painful change. And it has to be, understand this, that when you speak about the Caribbean in this world in which we are now living, and I conclude with this, there are 14 countries that are put together. I've gone to many conferences where this has been the case. The 12 English-speaking countries, Haiti and Suriname, are called the Caribbean because we have no defenders and allies in the major countries of the world. More than that, the West is declining, and the rest is rising. So China and India and Africa, from which we came, are now ascending. We have only had advantages because we have been part of the West for 500 years. We are modern societies of modest means. But now we are faced with a real challenge. We did not get our freedom personally or societally simply to imitate our past. We have it to construct a future different from our past. And if you can see and understand our lives in that way. You know, recently my wife was relocated as of the 1st of September to Washington. I hope nobody records and tells her. But wherever she has moved in the Caribbean, as a married woman, she didn't have any problem renting a house in her name. She's independent financially, strong professional, Caribbean woman as usual. But up there in Washington, she couldn't rent anything without my permission. And I said to her, that is just to show you that when it comes to the Caribbean woman, she is more advanced. She don't have to show her man that she is the boss. Publicly, she can give him food, but privately, he's under her rule. But here is this. Whether we are male or female and we rise in Caribbean society, the interest has not to be about gender, but about society and the kind of society we wish to build. I hope this foolishness may be of some use to you.
Thank you, Professor Miller, for that very thought-provoking presentation. I'm sure the ladies and gentlemen, and the students in the audience had a lot to think about in terms of genealogy and gender and generation, and your call for us not to reach back so much to the past, but to, in fact, create our own destiny now so that we can deal with the issues at hand as they relate to marginalization of males and, to some extent, females as well. So I'm going to invite Professor Miller and Mrs. Babel back to the stage, and we're going to have a few questions from the audience, and then we will go into the next session. So if you would like to ask questions, you may stand and I'll try to get in as many as I can. Any of the students, do you have questions? Okay. You can come to the microphone here. The microphone is right here.
Good morning. I wanted to ask, what was your challenges conducting this experiment with the research, with the
Thank you for that question. There were, of course, a number of challenges. One of the major one was really to find young men who would actually agree to sit down and talk to me for about 30 minutes to an hour about why they simply have not gone on, even though they could have gone on. And that was a major problem. At one point in time, I was really struggling. I actually had to write to the ministry to ask for permission to extend the research to some additional schools, because try as I did, I could find no student from a high-performing school, and I actually found none who was able to speak to me about why they hadn't gone on. I'm sure there must be some students from high-performing schools who have not gone on to do an associate degree or a degree. So that was the major challenge, of course. In the research process, you have to get comfortable with the notion of having to revise and revise your writing. Writing is a process, and it takes quite a lot of time. So even when you think you're finished, you still have to write again and make the revisions. So I would want to say to you students, please get comfortable with writing and rewriting and making it better. Don't see it as somebody's not picking on you in terms of your work, but see it as they're trying to help you to refine your work and to do a better good job.
I just want to add a little dimension to this, because I found a similar thing. I found it in Jamaica, I told you, Antigua last year. When you look at the statistics, it varies in different countries, but there's more females than males in the avenues of upward social mobility that gives. Countries call them differently, newer and older, traditional and so on. But when you look at the males that do survive CXC and get their 4 or 5 CSECs with English and maths, you will find that there's virtually almost an equal number. But when you look at those who go on to tertiary enrollment, you have this disparity that Ms. Bovell has spoken about. When you begin to go under the surface as to why, there is actually a societal bias in the labor force. The labor force encourages males of certain origins to work early, and it penalizes women. That's why they go on to further education, because they are not likely. However, when they go on, they get the better jobs, and in time the income becomes separated. Let me also add another little element, and this is to keep it real. Young women can attract support in a manner that young men cannot. I'm not going to go further with that. And in addition to that, there is the problem of who you know and not what you know.
just want to extend the point he made. That's why I use Borders social network theory in the study, because that basically says that the resources that you have in your network can help to determine whether you actually go on to higher education or if you don't go on. So if the females have a stronger network, the situational factor, they are more likely to be supported in going on financially, physically, and otherwise. Whereas in our culture, we tend to indeed want men to find a job, you know, be a man, man up.
I just want to say that, Professor Errol, that you are a fantastic role model to all the males here that think that they're possibly not academic enough to become educators, because education in Barbados is slightly feminized. There's lots of women. There's not many role models. I think you're an excellent role model, and I hope you've inspired some of the young men today to go on to become educators. The other thing I want to say is that the difference you found with the schools, perhaps like in England, it was the same when there was 11 plus, that the schools that were non-11 plus didn't aspire their young people, didn't raise the barriers. They kept a barrier there. You cannot go above this limit. Maybe some of the schools' attitudes need to change and raise the aspirations of the young men that they can go above the barrier, the same as anyone. Because some young men are late developers. They don't develop as young as the women. They might be ready at 11, but the boys may be 13. And by the time they get to 13, they could be ready to go above those barriers.
Mm-hmm. I'll just make two comments on that. One, let us not forget, the most marginalized people in societies are still females who have not done well in school and are from the lower socioeconomic categories. They are producing most of the underclass males. And she, as mother, is the only one they really care about, because she's with them in every situation, be it jail, be it all kinds of things. So let us remember that what we are talking about are statistical tendencies. And because we're talking about statistical tendencies, we have to be careful how we single out either male or female for special treatment, because we face the moral problem. If this girl, if there are 10 males who have not learned to read, but 4 females, how do you leave the 4 females behind? That is not right. And that is why we have to seek solutions that address overall justice in society. The other business is this, and this is the saving grace of the educational system. I'll just make this point. There has been no educational system designed in the world that can destroy all people with talent and ability. What it takes is for a teacher to defy the norm and to side with the student, to raise their horizon, to inspire them, not to look at where they are coming from, but what they can reach. And that is why we are not simply pawns. I gave a lecture, it's on the internet, it's on my website, which has just come back online. It's called Caribbean Teacher Education, the Power of the Marginalized. Because marginality is not a fatal condition, it is not a disease, it's a fact of human society. And what we're challenged with is whether we are going to accept it and conform with it, or we are going to fight it. But you cannot tell either the males or the females, the boys or the girls, just to accept it. You have to begin to tell them society was not set up for their success. And if they are going to succeed, they have to succeed against the odds and help them to fight those odds. I thank God for those people who have inspired me to fight the odds.
Ladies and gentlemen and students, join me in thanking Mrs. Baval and Professor Miller for their presentations this morning that, help us to understand even more about marginality and underrepresentation and so on as it relates to gender. And on behalf of the Ministry of Education, Technological and Vocational Training, and the conference organizers for this sixth conference, we want to extend our thanks and give you these tokens of appreciation for your presentations this morning. Hope you enjoy them.
I think Dr. Bolden used the term intellectual discourse the last 2 days, and I think this morning was definitively intellectual discourse. I want to thank you guys for participating and for engaging the presenters in a very positive and meaningful way. And I want to thank Professor Miller and almost Dr. Bavel in a few months for engaging us, and I want to thank our young people for participating, and I hope this was very useful and beneficial to you as Cape Sixth Form students. At this point in time, let me introduce our Minister of Education, the Honourable Lucille Moore, who is our Acting Minister for Education, Technological and Vocational Training at this point in time. She is going to be delivering our closing speech, and I am sure, students, you can stay. I would really love you all to stay. Transportation issues. All right. But that's only one school with transportation issues. The others can stay. Ladies and gentlemen, Minister Moore.
Good morning, everyone. Master of Ceremonies, Dr. the Honourable Era Miller, educator par excellence, joining us from Jamaica. Senator Dr. Rommel Springer, Parliamentary Secretary, Ministry of Education, Technological and Vocational Training. Mrs. Joy Adamson, Deputy Chief Education Officer, Ministry of Education, Technological and Vocational Training. Dr. Patrick Rowe, Director of Higher Education Development Unit. Principals and teachers, representatives from the Ministry of Education, Technological and Vocational Training, and Higher Education Development Unit. Participants, specially invited guests, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, and of course, all of the children from the schools. Good morning again. I would like to thank you all for completing a phenomenal initiative. I wish to convey my sincerest gratitude first to the organizers of the conference, the partners, and the sponsors, a special thank you to you. I also believe that the substantive minister, the Honourable Santia Bradshaw, would want to thank you for the constructive dialogue and the collaboration that was demonstrated both in the planning and the execution of this forum. I would also like to especially thank the international presenters for gracing our shores and sharing their enlightened insights, as well as the moderators and other participants for facilitating and engaging in productive and progressive discussion that will hopefully serve to inform our practice going forward. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct honor to be offering these closing remarks at what can be described as undoubtedly a very successful higher education conference. This comes at a time when our government, as you know, is faced with an economic environment that requires striking the balance between the management of austerity measures while at the same time ensuring that the overall economic goals are met and that the citizens of the nation can personally lead productive lives. So given that your theme for the week was modern education and economic stimulation, I am assured that the Ministry of Education continues to be a part of the solution. I hope there's a comprehensive after-action report that we can utilize in the upcoming weeks, Dr. Rowe. Let us not let it become a stale report in March next year. This conference has allowed participants to engage in a constructive discourse, but more importantly, provided much needed insight across multiple disciplines. Additionally, it permitted us to explore further avenues for future intervention in areas such as renewable energy, TVET, STEM, educational policy, and special needs education. We have also been exposed to valuable philosophical contributions as to how we can approach the redevelopment and re-engineering of our higher education sector, our leadership capacity, our broad human capital development, and this morning we looked at disparities in attainment across gender. These are the issues with which we grapple on a daily basis. And I want again to say thank you. This analysis of our education landscape at this time required innovative and energized minds to look for new paradigms to arrest any static or lethargic modalities still lurking in our closets. Although we have made significant strides with initiatives such as Skills for the Future and the gains from the Competency-Based Training Fund, we will have further strides to make in ensuring that the quality of our education experience produces the type of citizen and decision maker that can critically engage with knowledge and harness a spirit of civic engagement and contribute to building a nation that is economically sound and that competes with distinction in the global economy. At this point, I want to pause and take the opportunity to acknowledge the contribution of our local post-secondary institutions. The oldest tertiary institution in our group, celebrating 70 years of service to local and regional nation building, the Eardiston College. We celebrate with pride the strides and impact that your organization has made over the period of its existence, and it's clear that your engine is overhauled and primed for better mileage. The Barbados Community College and the Samuel Jackman Prescott Institute of Technology are both on the cusp of 50 years of service to this country, and your institutions have quietly produced the backbone of the economy. They have produced the technologists, technicians, and artisan-level craftsmen, the professionals who are the mainstay of this society in the work of nurses and social workers, the artists across music, theater, and dance, visual arts, and the journalists plying their trade around the media houses locally. The Barbados Vocational Training Board, who through their work takes rough stones and turns them into gems through the skills training program and the apprenticeship system, I want to say thanks to you all for your work, and we celebrate your commitment to national development. I am also very aware that the 4 institutions have moved through the completion of the required registration stage with the Barbados Accreditation Council, and you are working together towards securing institutional accreditation. I urge you to assume the mantle of pioneering quality education practice in Barbados, such that our learners are amassing relevant 21st century skill sets. To do this successfully requires that you pay careful attention to a number of areas as you strive forward. In the 2015 Education for All UNESCO report, 3 themes emerged from that analysis that I want you to further embrace as you move to your Barbados accreditation standards permanently in place. These include institutional sustainability, quality and good governance, and accountability. Your theme this week spoke to sustainability as a key pillar in modern education policy, and I want to share a 2018 UNESCO statement which speaks to education for sustainable development, and the acronym ESD, and I quote, "ESD empowers learners to take informed decisions and responsible actions for environmental integrity, economic viability, and a just society for present and future generations while respecting cultural diversity." It is about lifelong learning and is an integral part of quality education. ESD is holistic and transformational education, which addresses learning content and outcomes and the learning environment. It achieves its purpose by transforming society. Within the Barbadian context, our efforts must coalesce around maintaining considerable levels of public and national investment in education at all levels to ensure the maintenance of noticeably impressive returns on our investments. Currently, our TVET provision does not sufficiently meet the demands of matriculation, and we turn away many students every year seeking spaces to study. There is a need to expand capacity and access in our existing institutions. This will bring greater course diversity in diploma and degree offerings, broader apprenticeship offerings, and a critical rationalization of how and where we deploy our resources to meet the emerging needs of the society. The academic experience of our students arguably has a direct correlation with the types of citizens released into the workplace. A strong belief is held that the quality of post-secondary TVET education provisions must be underpinned by the quest to ensure that the experience for each learner is transformational in nature. It is important, therefore, that a focus on education for sustainable development emphasizes developing knowledge areas that address the vulnerabilities that threaten a small island developing state like Barbados. We must pay careful attention to environmental protection and disaster risk reduction to ensure a sustainable future. This conference took a look at the issue of renewable energy, and quite rightly so, given that the gains we can realize by harnessing sustainable systems all around us. Programs in photovoltaic installation and maintenance are now being offered, and we're introducing students to new high-level techniques and skill sets. This is also exposing them to novel avenues for entrepreneurship, and at the same time, providing skilled craftsmen and technologists for the energy sector. This is quite a start, but we can recognize the importance of building this sector to provide services to the Caribbean region by offering scores of programs from this skills training program all the way through to UWI. We have done it before with an innovative solar water heating industry, and we could push on to position ourselves to put a substantial dent in our fossil fuel bills and CO2 emissions. To deliver at this level of new training, it is my view that teaching and learning strategies must embrace new multimodal ways of instructional delivery and assessment. It requires a fresh mindset and a commitment to continuous professional development that keeps us at the leading edge of technology. Barbados has long been recognized regionally and internationally for its high standard of education provision. The bar has been set, and this conference says to me, you are raising that bar. In closing, I cannot stress sufficiently the importance of our higher education sector to the economic development of Barbados. I want to impress upon all educators to seek and create a learning environment that awakens the desire for learning within our students, where learning is exciting and enjoyable. To accomplish this, it is crucial that delivery transcends boundaries. It must depart from the notion of the passive learner and create learning spaces where classrooms are centers for active learning, where education is free, where educators are free to situate themselves as equal participants in the learning process. Our education cannot operate in digital darkness, but must continually avail themselves of the new and emerging technologies that will enable students to discover knowledge in new and exciting ways as they position themselves in contributing to our nation's economic development, thereby repositioning Barbados to successfully compete in the global economy. With regards to Urdeston that I mentioned earlier, I know the Urdeston College from when I was very young. I actually grew up just outside of the school gates, just outside. And all of my young days, from the time I was about maybe 4 years old to when I was about 18, I went off to school. I spent all my days up and down through Urdeston. In those days, the Teachers College actually had teachers come from other Caribbean islands. And there was a huge interaction then of Caribbean people here in Barbados who availed themselves of Urdeston, because there were actually boarders. They had a facility there where people stayed, and from I was very young, it was always something that has always stayed on my mind, and I've always remembered interacting with all these people from the different Caribbean islands. So I'm really glad, personally, that Urdeston has reached this milestone. I've seen it from many, many years. I also have a personal relationship with Urdeston. My grandfather taught there back in the late 50s, early 60s. He taught at Urdeston. And so between that association and my own growing up in that area, I really want to, on behalf of myself, congratulate Urdeston on this milestone. All in all, I think the conference today was the conference this over the last few days went extremely well, and I'm glad that there were so many people from all over the region and further afield that were participants. I'm also glad that there were many schools that were here today, and I just want to say, in closing, to thank everyone very much for allowing me to share just a small part of this event with you. Thank you, and everyone have a wonderful day.
We have a very special presentation to close this morning's session from Barbados Community College. Young budding vocalist and talented keyboardist. And I am going to allow you to enjoy the sultry sounds that the young lady coming towards me will be delivering this morning.
Morning. Here we go. As mentioned, my name is Honourable. I am a student at the Barbados Community College Music Program. Today, accompanying me on piano is Jazz Gittins, and we will be running a selection just mainly about support and always having somebody there, because you always need somebody in the end. So, hope you enjoy. find my way out of my world and finally breathe. Right before my eyes I saw my heart, it came to life. This ain't easy, it's not meant to be. Every story has its scars. When the pain cuts you deep, when the night keeps you from sleeping, just look and you will see that I will be your remedy. When the world seems so cruel and your heart makes you feel like a fool, I promise you will see that I will be your remedy. No river is too wide or too deep for me to swim to you. Come whenever, I'll be the shelter that won't let the rain come through. Your love, it is my truth, and I will always love you. Love you. When the pain cuts you deep, when the night keeps you from sleeping, just look and you will see that I will be your remedy. When the world seems so cruel and your heart makes you feel like a fool, I promise you will see that I will be your remedy. When the pain cuts you deep, when the night keeps you from sleeping, just look and you will see that I will be your remedy. When the world seems so cruel and your heart makes you feel like a fool, I promise you will see that I will be your remedy. Thank you.
We're almost there, you know. When the transportation arrives, you have to move. Ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the close of our conference, and I want to thank you very much for participating. I'd like to thank young Gittins and his partner who is almost heading through the door at the back. Thank you very much, young lady. I am sure your principal is proud, and we look forward to great things from our young musicians. Barbados Community College has been producing our musicians across Barbados for decades, and they will continue to support that sector as we move forward. Well, we have young Gittins and Professor Gittins now coming into the auditorium. Thank you very much, Roger. Minister, thank you very much for providing us with some very encouraging remarks. Thank you for taking the time out, because I know that you're very busy trying to straddle two different ministries, and I appreciate the time you took to come here this morning. Let me say that, and I have to say this, we're a little sparse this morning, and I wonder if it has anything to do with the lunch. I hope not. Professor Miller, thank you very much for joining us from Jamaica. We look forward to continuing this discussion tomorrow. I appreciate the level of discourse you brought this morning, and I think it was nothing less than stimulating. Ms. Bovell, thank you for joining us this morning also, and for sharing in a topic that really will occupy us for a while yet, because the trend seems not to be turning in the direction we would like to see it turning. So we have to come up with solutions. We cannot just say, well, the males aren't going to college or the males aren't coming to the university and throw our hands up. We have to find solutions. And it's the hour for finding those solutions is upon us. When you start moving into 20 and 30% of enrollment being male, that is untenable. So we have to figure out how we're going to tackle this. So thanks very much again for the support you gave. My team from HEDU, unwavering as always. I appreciate all the support that you provided over the course of the week. The institutions and the offices in the ministry that provided support for the conference, thank you very much, and have a wonderful remainder of the day today. We are closed.